This is former SM3 Dempsey of the USS Mount Hood, and today I am bringing you a podcast of SM3 Akin, who was on the ship long before me in the early 70s. and this broadcast is an excellent podcast. I just wanted to point out that there's going to be some parts where there's some feedback just because the way we recorded it. But if you hang in there, there's a lot of good, clear parts, and you should enjoy this one. One of my favorites to date, so check it out. So welcome to AEC Stories. This is former SM3 Dempsey of the USS Mount Hood podcast. And today I've got a special guest, I like to joke and call them my sea ancestors, because they were the shipmates that were on the Mount Hood before me. And this is John Akin. And welcome aboard, John, and fellow Signalman. Nice to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Lynn. I'm glad to be here.
So, what made you pick the Navy over the Army or anything else?
Well, most of my family members, my older brother, brother-in-law, all of those joined the Navy, so I kind of thought that might be just a tradition to continue with.
Yeah. So, just keep up with the family tradition. Had you watched any movies on it or had any ideas what it would be like?
I really had no idea. My brother just told me he was a few years older than me, but he went through boot camp, and he told me some of the things to kind of expect going through boot camp, and that's really about the only knowledge I had of any of it. I really didn't know what to expect.
Well, that's pretty cool. So were you picking it? You didn't really pick a rate. You just signed up, and did they sell you on you can pick any job you want once you get there kind of thing?
No, actually, when I talked to the recruiter, the minimum amount of time that you could sign up for was what they called the Seafarer program, which was 3 years.
Okay.
And there's no guaranteed A school. They just put you in there and test you and put you where they need you, I guess.
That makes sense. So you went up to San Diego. Did you have a choice of your boot camp or not?
I did. I requested San Diego. That's why I went to boot camp.
Yeah, the California dream. That was mine. I don't know if you wanted to see California as bad as I did, but it was on the list.
I wanted to see sunny California too, but I like to froze to death at night. San Diego gets cold at night.
It sure does. So was boot camp what you were expecting, or you kind of had some insight, just keep your head down and keep marching forward, or how was it for you?
Well, a little unsure of everything. I was 17 years old when I went into boot camp, turned 18 about halfway through. My mom had signed for me to go in, and I really didn't know what to expect, other than what my brother told me, that there's a lot of people yelling at you all the time. So I just tried to keep my nose clean and work my way through it. And actually, I was meritoriously advanced when I graduated from boot camp from a E1 to an E2. So I guess I did okay.
Nice. Little pay bump for doing good in boot camp. Probably $15 more. Not too much back then. Not too much when I was in, as a matter of fact. I gotta tell you, my paycheck was $280 as an E1 every 2 weeks in 1987, 88.
I honestly don't remember what I was getting paid except for whenever I got out.
Right?
I was a third-class petty officer, just like yourself. I was married. I'd been married for 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was getting $565 a month.
Oh, my.
Pay. And my rent in Concord was $165 a month out of that $565. So
Wow.
that was probably one of the driving reasons why I didn't really feel like that was where I wanted to be.
Right? I mean, was that like a middle class living back then, or how did that rank? This is 1973. Well, you were in what, 73 to 76, or what years?
I got out in January of '79. The ship was in dry dock in Alameda.
Okay.
And I didn't have much time left, so I actually got out about 2 months early.
So 79, you did 6 years in?
Oh, I'm sorry. '76.
Okay. I was like, wait a second. That's okay.
Yeah, I'm off on my timing, but yeah, January '76. I was a 3-year run.
Okay. So you guys did your Westpac and you did some time over in the Vietnam Operation Theater as well?
Yeah, I made 2 Westpac cruises in the 3-year tenure. The first cruise, actually, when I was assigned to the Mount Hood, as I said, I wasn't given an A school, so I didn't get to pick where I went. The Navy just put me in deck force on the Mount Hood. And when I would stand watches, after I would get off watch, I would go up to the signal bridge on the upper level, right above the bridge, if I was on a wing watch or whatever. And I kind of befriended the leading petty officer, which is the 3rd class. I don't know if I can say his name, but really nice guy. He transferred to the Mount Hood from one of the sister ships there in Concord, and just being a 3rd class, But I kind of befriended him, and I was fascinated by what they did up there, the signalman. And I started learning on my own time with his help, the Morse code, the flags, because he gave me a deck of cards that had all the flags on it, and I'd study them, and he would quiz me as he'd just pull the card up and show the card and cover the name on it, and I had to tell him what it was. Well, over the course of a short few months, I learned the Morse code, and we would get on opposite sides of the signal bridge on a searchlight, aim the light in the deck, and send messages to one another. He showed me the semaphore and all of that as well, and we got into a situation on the first cruise where it was something pretty, I don't know, it was pretty flared up or inflamed over in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And they sent us out, I guess, just to be there in case something really lit up where they needed the armament to quell things. But anyway, the signal bridge was shorthanded. And being as I had been going up to the signal bridge, the leading petty officer, John was his first name, asked if he could get me to come up and act as his recorder to any messages, light messages that would be sent. Because we started a 45-day around-the-clock, 8-hour on, 8-hour off watch schedule. So John had set it up to where he had one of the guys that was pretty well versed in everything, standing the daylight, and we would kind of rotate in to help with that. But we had 2 other groups of 2 people in each group that paired up on these watches. Well, John said it with permission from deck force to allow me to stand watches with him. So the other guys, the way he had it set up was, they could stand paired up those watches, and then I paired up with him. Mm-hmm. And being as they were that short-handed after that 45-day period, they figured they needed to get a striker board to, shore up that signal bridge gang, because they were just pretty skeleton as far as the crew. And I was able to go to the striker board, and I went through their testing and questions and all that stuff, and I was picked because of the knowledge that I had already of what took place. That's pretty nice. He was looking out for you, and you got better duty, I would say, than being in deck. That's some hard infantry level work, I'd call it, being in deck department. Yeah, I did my share of needle scaling, chip painting, and painting in that position. Probably why I wear hearing aids today, is I'm sure that had something to do with it. But
true.
I was responsible for the U-boat area on the port side, right in front of the superstructure, there was 2 U-boats right there. Crew U-boats.
Yeah, we'd use them as Liberty boats sometimes later on.
Right, and I was responsible for that area, so I guess I kind of took pride in what they assigned me to do, so I was going to strip that paint to bare metal and make that shine in that area. And actually, when we were underway once, I was down there just working away with those little needle speeders. I was really getting after it. Once somebody's tapping me on my shoulder, it was a messenger of the watch. He come down and he said the officer of the deck while we were underway said, I was done. I could quit for the day.
Yeah, I think the work ethic back then, I think guys just worked. They didn't bitch and moan about much because in that era, people didn't really know any different than hard work coming up. My generation, and I'm not, I'm very, I speculate, I'm open-minded and everything. Some of us had been spoiled. HBO was in every house and fast food had grown. A lot of things had gotten a little more fat cat happy for a lot of guys. So, this was just the beginning. I think it probably progressed from they're like, damn it, it's hard work and I hate it. But I would guess in your era, hard work was just a normal thing and people didn't whine about it too much. Or am I wrong about that?
No, I think you pretty much just got up every day. You knew the work had to be done, and that was, your job to do. You just did it.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of a pain in the ass myself. Because, my first few years, I had a few captain's masts before I decided to become a petty officer and a master at arms and all that stuff. But, yeah.
I got rode up captain's mast one time.
Did you?
I did. I was on the signal bridge. I think I hadn't really went up for the petty officer rank yet. I was just still a seaman. And it was my turn to help clean the compartment, the berthing compartment.
Yeah.
And I was, the gunner's mates were in our berthing compartment as well as ship's office personnel and the radarman, the radioman, the signalman, all of the operations were in that compartment. And well, anyway, it's my turn to clean the compartment, help clean the compartment. And I happened to be running the broom, get the dust, sweeping the dust, all that kind of dust mop, I guess, through the area where the gunner's mate slept. And there was a brass bullet with a brass casing with a silver bullet head on it on the floor over in the gunner's mate's area. And I thought, well, gosh, somebody that probably wants to keep that. I'm sure that's a pretty nice little thing they had made or something. And I thought, well, where the hell am I going to put this thing? I don't want it in my shirt pocket or whatever. And I thought, well, I'll just stick it. You remember the center compartment in your bunk?
Yeah.
Where your padlock was? You slide that out, just a little box compartment. You put all your knickknacks and stuff. Well, I stuck it in there, and I thought, well, this evening after I get back and we're all done with our duty and the evening meal, I'll pull that out and take it over to the gunner's mates and say, I don't know whose this is, but I found it when I was sweeping. Well, as it would have, or as it would be, I forgot about it. And about 2 days later, they had a surprise inspection, compartment inspection, so where they were checking people's personal stuff, their racks, and all that stuff. And I was standing there when they opened, I opened the rack for them, and they opened it up, and he reaches down, and he pulls out that bullet. And I thought, oh crap, I forgot to give that back to the gunner's mate. And he's kind of messing around with it a little bit, just kind of twirling around. Pretty soon he grabs the silver end of that bullet, and he pulls it apart. It's a roach clip. So I get rode up for this thing.
Oh my goodness! You've got paraphernalia, and you're trying to be a good guy. What a three-way cross that is!
Yeah, well, it was a roach clip. And I had to go up before the XO before I went to the captain's mast, and I told the XO it wasn't mine. I told him the same stories I told you. Mm-hmm. And before they sent me on to captain's mast, the XO talked to the gunner's mate's division officer.
Yeah.
And told him the story. And he says, well, that's probably true because I saw one of my guys with that.
Oh.
So they dropped the charge. So I didn't have to go to captain's mast.
Was there a lot of guys, smoking weed back in the day? It was kind of the hippie era, the disco era. You guys were the end of one era into another, and the novelty of it all was really big. It wasn't like the 50s or anything. Was that pretty common out there? I'm not asking you if you're like a big pothead or anything. That's not what I'm trying to find out.
No, there were users on board. There's, just not, as far as the number of crew members that were using, I mean, who knows about down in the lower levels, but up in my area, there was, a small nucleus of those that used, and I don't know how they ever got away with not being caught, but I guess
most of them didn't. Did you have urinalysis back then or no?
I'm sorry?
Did you guys have urinalysis testing back then? Piss test?
Oh, yeah. A number of times they do surprise inspections, and then the UAs and stuff like that, I'd go in and just, fill the thing up just right away, and there's always somebody standing around in there. You're just thinking, well, maybe he doesn't have to go at this time. But usually there would be a question posed to you like, you got any extra? Thing. I had that happen on many occasions, but it was either they couldn't go or they didn't go because of that reason.
How interesting. I was just curious because later on they would watch you urinate, they'd stare at you, at the urinal. It wasn't getting any sneakier. They were starting to nail guys. It became a zero tolerance, but I think back in your day, it was like a captain's mast or restriction or something, I'm guessing.
Yeah, in our time, if they were caught, it would be a captain's mast and fines. Could be a reduction in rank.
Yeah.
I really don't know a lot of people that were busted in that manner, but there were probably some that were, I'm sure.
That's funny. I know I've talked to one guy. He was trying to build a alcohol still on the ship and make Pruno or whatever, like the jailhouse liquor. Out of potatoes or something.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently he did it wrong, and him and his crew of buddies were projectile vomiting over the side of the ship. And
there was
an
occasional bottle of liquor that was smuggled on board that wasn't supposed to be there, obviously.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've talked to guys like, yeah, we were drinking. I'm like, I wasn't. I go, gee, I was like one of the hardest, bar-hitting sailors back in the day in port. Ironically, I quit drinking. I was in for 6 years. I quit drinking my third year in for 18 years after that. How weird is that? So...
Well, at that time, I did my share of youthful indiscretions when we hit port. But I took a lot of standby duty, too, because I'd make extra money doing that, standing people's quarterdeck watches. I got hung with some short patrol after I made petty officer.
Oh, yeah.
But I still did my liberties like that.
Okay. So, where did you, what was your favorite port that you get to pull into on some of that traveling after coming from a little town in Kansas?
My favorite port?
Yeah.
Probably PI.
Yeah? I think I was lucky enough. Go ahead. Sorry.
San Miguel.
I think everybody has fond memories of that. That was like your reward for joining the Navy, right?
I got a picture, probably should forward it to the bridge from the Navy base into along Oklahoma City, all the little kids in their boats below where you slip them.
Oh, really?
So that sort of thing. The one that I got a picture of this one young lad with his white sailor hat on, and it says Nixon on the front of the hat.
Oh, wow.
He's looking up, wanting you to flip in coins.
Oh, over in what we would call Shit River, going over the bridge there.
Yeah. I didn't know how truthful I could be about
The name?
the name. But yeah, Shit River was it.
There's no editing on this. That's the beautiful thing about the podcast is it's not filtered by the FCC or anybody. That's why it's so real, and that's why there's such a draw to the audience, because a lot of people just say it how it is, you know? And we don't want the history version, you know, that's too clear, but we're not trying to get you in trouble with your wife or your family or anything either, you know?
Yeah, you'd want to be careful, I'm sure, at this stage in your life.
It might reflect my great world tour of the adult bookstores of the world. I don't know, but the red light districts of the world, as taught to you by Seaman Jones.
I never thought whenever I set foot. Actually, my first cruise, I think we stopped at Guam for just a short overnight.
Yeah.
I don't recall if we went straight through or we might have stopped at Guam, but it was a very short stop wherever it was. And then we went straight over to Subic Bay. And when my first Liberty, I had, I was in deck force at that time, and I had a young petty officer in deck force. He goes, yeah, just stick with me. He says, I'll show you the ropes and this and that. And he says, it gets kind of crazy over here. Boy, he wasn't kidding. I was not prepared for that at all. I mean, I thought, holy smokes, you know, if we did some of this stuff in America, we'd be probably in jail.
I did a podcast the other night with an old friend. He was on, he's from New York. And we were doing one, and we were talking about, I said, don't you think that we were always, or it was one of my podcasts, I got to remember now, I've done so many. I was like, anywhere a Navy shipport would be, it looked like something out of a Starsky and Hutch crime scene. You know, I mean, I felt like if we walked off the ship, the soundtrack should have been some of that chicka-down kind of music, because that was the environment we were in, at least when I was in.
It seems like where the gangplank would go down, it was always in an area where it just kind of promoted that type of environment. You know, the drinking and the overconsumption of the alcohol, and you know, just the behavior that comes with that.
Oh, for sure.
The shore patrol thing, whatever, that's really a whole new experience when you do that. And I wasn't prepared for that at all. I got to be, I think my first stretch of shore patrol was at the Philippines, and it was at the jail, nonetheless, just before you go across the bridge, you know.
Yeah.
Along the coast, they got the jail there on the left. And I got to act as a jailer, and boy, when they bring the paddy wagons in with all the trouble that comes with that, it's pretty unbelievable, the stuff that takes place.
Yeah, I had some fun there. I get a picture of a couple of shipmates with, their whites on and their nightsticks and a San Miguel in their hand. And their shore patrol uniforms, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, all the patrol I saw was, not that what you're saying didn't take place, because it probably did. I did walk a beat in up the streets.
Yeah.
Usually you're paired up with somebody when you're doing that, but I think everybody I walked the beat with, they were, we pretty much kept our heads straight and just watched for trouble, which for the most part there wasn't a lot. I mean,
I saw some good fights.
Late on the nights when it would flare, towards the end of the night.
Well, to put it in a very clear and old macho way, I worked as a bouncer a few times, worked as a master at arms. And, when I was in Canada and guys getting in fights, and the bouncers would say this, they'd say, hey, it's midnight, it's fight or fuck time. And as raw and as down low as that sounds, it's basically, okay, nobody's meeting any women, and they're not going to have any girlfriends, and this has become a male primarily infested club, and there's going to be a lot of fighting going on because the testosterone's boiling over. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't think I could have describe it really much better. Actually, I think that's pretty much. They don't put it up above for you to read like that, but it seems to be an ingrained thing. It's pretty much spot on.
It was a great psychological evaluation by a fine Canadian bouncer. That's all I can tell you. Had nothing to do with me.
I'm sure.
So, did you meet your wife in Concord or out there in San Francisco or something? Because you said you were.
Actually, no. My wife of 42 years I met in high school before I went to the Navy.
Oh, wow.
Camp. I wasn't real sure, like I said, what I was going to do in life, and she was going to go off to college, and it was going to be, several miles away, and it wasn't like we were going to be able to go on our regular dates and stuff like that. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with my life here? I need to try to get some kind of feeling for what I want to do. So I just decided that I needed to go away and see if this was all going to work. And I went off to boot camp. She graduated. I went to boot camp, or left for boot camp 9 weeks early because I graduated from high school early. And she continued out and finished high school, graduation, and all of that. And we just wrote letters back and forth all the time when I was gone. I'd start a letter. I could be writing it for a week before I'd ever send it off, or even longer sometimes when we were out at sea. So it was about a year, I think, after I graduated boot camp. They kept me there at San Diego for the Treasure Island School. I think that unrep rigging school, which is 2 weeks. And then I came home on leave, and I was home for, I think, 2 weeks. And then I had to go back to catch the ship, which I didn't catch. I was supposed to catch a ship in Concord, was the home port. And the people that set up all your flights whenever you go home on leave, she set it up for me to come back to San Francisco, and then they put me on a helicopter from San Francisco to fly across the bay to Alameda, and then catch some bus or something that took me to Concord to catch the ship. And it was like, I don't know, close to 6, 7 o'clock at night by the time I got to Concord, to the base. And when I got there, I told them I needed to report to the Mount Hood. They said the Mount Hood's not here. And I said, well, where is the ship? And they said it was in Alameda. I just got off a helicopter in Alameda. But they ended up sending the duty driver to pick me up. And I had to sit and wait on him to get there, which took him whatever time it was. It was close to midnight by the time I got back to Alameda with the duty driver. And I had about 5 minutes left before I would have been considered in trouble for not checking on board in time. But anyway, the officer of the deck, when I checked on board, reporting on board for duty, whatever, one of the guys that became really a really good friend of mine was coming back from Liberty. He and a quartermaster friend of his, they were coming back from Liberty. They were being loud, having a good time. Probably had a few beer on their way back. But anyway, the officer of the deck says, well, who's going to check him in? Well, this one was Signalman, which you did a podcast with him just, a little while ago, Jim Warwick.
Yep.
And Jim says, well, I'll check him in. So Jim took me up to the ship's office, and Chuck went on to, the quartermaster went on to the berthing compartment, went to bed. Well, Jim checked me in, and we talked for a little bit. And Jim's first line is always, where are you from? Where are you from? He's from Iowa, the Midwest. I'm from Kansas. And we talked for a little bit, and he goes, well, I don't really know where you're going to go, he says. But he says, I got an empty rack up here by me. He says, why don't you come in here? He says, I'll find a blanket and and you can just sleep here tonight. So if it wasn't for Jim, I'd probably been sleeping on the floor somewhere. I don't know where I would have been, but anyway, Jim checked me in, and I crashed in the rack there by him, and it didn't seem like it was any time at all. And the lights came on, and I was just in a. I really didn't know where I was going. And Jim ended up back in the ship's office trying to figure out where I was going to end up at. But I ended up in deck force.
Yeah. That's the good old unrep station. You know, I had a BM1 Zemer, who I keep bringing up in all my podcasts, one of the biggest downloaders of the podcast, and he's participated. He's actually in Naples, Italy now, working for Department of Defense, in charge of port operations. But he became a senior chief, retired. And like he said, on that ship, you're going to use your job. If you're a signalman, you're going to communicate more than you will on another ship. And if you're a bosun's mate, you're going to do more bosun's mate work than you will on another ship. Because we had to unrep all those ships. Once they were unrepped, they just took off. We had a line waiting. We were like the cafeteria, you know?
Right.
I never thought... Good.
A lot of the alongside replenishments, and I don't know what kind of volume of armament we passed, but we did vert rep and unrep at the same time on multiple hookups, and mostly without very much ado, I'd say. There was some issues. We did have one, I think he was a gunner's mate, got pinned against the bulkhead with a 2,000-pound bomb.
Wow.
That messed him up. They airlifted him off into Hawaii. And I did see him at the end of that cruise, and he went from like a 240-pound man to about 150 pounds.
What happened? Did it just crush his bones, or it must have been horrible?
He got between the that 2,000-pound bombs and a big kind of containment device all to itself. And when it would have been forward of the superstructure, the first stream replenishment station would have been right by close to where the quarterdeck would have been set up if you would have been in port. But it was forward of the U-boats that I described and the superstructure, so it would have been the first one on the port side. He was, I don't know, one of the gunner's mates, I guess it was, rigging the stuff up. They picked it up. Apparently they didn't get it high enough. The ship took a roll or a big swell or something, and it pinned him against that bulkhead.
Wow.
And they airlifted the boy off. I did see him, like I said, in Hawaii when we were heading back. That would have been 6 months later. And he had went from, like I said, a 240-pound man to about 150, 60-pound man. He really lost a lot of weight. A lot of internal injuries, I'm sure.
I can imagine that.
That was the most serious. Just other things, guys may got drug off over the side when they didn't let go of the rope that steadied the pallet or whatever, got drug over the side of the bulkhead in between the ships, and then they dropped into the water, and then the trailing destroyers would fish them out of the water. Had that happen a time or two. But
my most adventurous man overboard drill was to save a box that had a bolt in it. We were in the Persian Gulf, and the helo blew some box that came off, and we had to go after it like it could have been the one part that could have saved the world. And it's interesting, because in the Persian Gulf, you've got sea snakes. You see these huge snakes, like long anaconda snakes swimming under the water. Water's pretty clear. Weirdest looking thing, I didn't even think they existed. Never seen a National Geographic on them or anything. And they were everywhere. And me and my buddy were going down there, we're like, you know what? When those snakes pop up, I'm going to rip his friggin' head off, you know? Anyway, I remember...
the Indian Ocean was the clearest water I think I ever was in.
Yeah.
It was just like glass, just clear. You could see forever down in it. But that was some of the clearest water.
I never saw any sharks. I looked for them. I was curious. I did see sea snakes. I think the ship put out so much noise it just probably scared sharks and things away, you know?
Dolphins, you ever go up to
Yeah.
the bow and look over the edge of the bow while you were moving? The dolphins would just get right in that wake. The keel was cutting and they just play in that they'd play in there for hours.
Oh, the dolphins loved it. Especially in San Diego, we'd see a lot of dolphins. I don't know. I remember seeing whales, like orcas, when we were cruising up to Canada and up, by the Aleutian Islands and stuff. Definitely saw some of those killer whales. Yeah.
Well, I think I spotted a whale or two. I think perhaps at one time, we wasn't really sure, but I was pretty sure that it was a periscope from a submarine. I don't know who it belonged to. Spotted one of those, I think.
Right.
We were buzzed by Vietnamese MiGs.
Oh, the MiGs came by?
Oh, yeah, we got buzzed at time or two. Of course, quarter sounded then, and we all manned our battle stations probably faster than we ever did in our lives.
Well, it's kind of hard to shoot a MiG with the guns that we had on board. We had a Stinger in Desert Storm, but, that would have taken out the MiG. But that was technology that didn't exist yet, I don't think, in the era, No,
we had 3-inch 50 caliber guns.
Yeah.
Well, that's small arms. I mean, you can shoot at them with a pistol or whatever. We didn't have much. We usually weren't too far off from a carrier task force, but we stayed far enough away that we were not usually in visual sight of them at most times. But there was a time when off the coast of Vietnam where there was just like a huge mountain right there. And we couldn't identify a contact. There was a contact out there off of the forward port side. And they yelled up on the spot box for us to see if we could tell what that was. Well, of course, we had the big eyes up there. I'm sure they were still there when you were there.
Oh, yeah.
The binoculars on the stands.
Still there in the Navy.
I was looking at those things, and they kept yelling up from the port wing. They're standing up there with little hand binoculars, and they're looking, and I'm looking through the big eyes. What is it? What is it? I don't know. I can't tell. All I can see this map, and this is a tall mountain, and all you see is this big map. You can't see anything other than that, and then pretty soon you start to see a little bit more of it come out from behind that mountain. And boy, I tell you, when it finally got out there where they could see them big guns, General Quarters sounded.
Yeah.
Captain got on Navy Red. We had a couple, I don't know whether they were F4s or what it was, but we had a couple off-aircraft carriers. They got some air support over there right quick. And we turned that thing and kicked it in gear. 22 knots isn't that fast, but
no. Nope.
Anyway, we were moving to get away from that. It was a Vietnamese gunboat, destroyer gunboat. It had his big gun.
Sneaking up on you, huh?
I'm sorry?
They was kind of sneaking up on you with all its firepower and speed and stealth.
Well, I don't think anybody really expected that to come out of there. I think that's part of what kind of just scared everybody more than anything. But it was unexpected. And, we figured we were just in the wrong place and maybe we needed to move a little further offshore.
Like, oh, sorry, wrong beach. I can imagine. You guys were in. That was when the war was a little winding down. I mean, when was the Vietnam War officially over, actually?
Well, April of '75. That would have been the last campaign, Operation Frequent Wind, and the Mount Hood was involved. It was in that flotilla of ships offshore during the helicopter evacuation, and we were pretty busy during that little 10-year time. We didn't really take on any refugees. We inherited a flag admiral from somewhere because I remember raising his start. But anything that would float
Yeah.
that they could get out of their on was just covered from front to back and all four sides. I mean, it was just people, just bodies. They wanted out of there, and my job was just basically sending out different messages to different ships out there to go do this or do that. And they sometimes funnel some messages into us. Well, what do you want me to do, kind of thing. And there was some Vietnamese girl on the destroyer that was out there that was giving birth during this time. And it was just chaos. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, that was you were definitely in one of those movies, that's for sure.
Yeah, I would say probably so. But anyway, we finished that, which was, it's, a couple of days of pretty hard, not much sleep, work. And then when we left there, we got kind of tied into, I think, the task force that was headed towards Cambodia. Magwith was taken.
Yeah.
And we were kind of steaming that direction to rearm if need be. But they got smart enough to let them go and turned the crew and the ship back loose. And then we turned for the Philippines, and we went on back to Subic Bay, and that's where one of the places was Grande Island, just as you enter into Subic Bay.
Yeah.
Little island out there, water all around it. As you enter Subic Bay, they turned that into the refugee place, and it was just the Marines kind of had the island set up with tents and fresh water, food, the whole thing, and that island was just covered with people, and it was just a human mass of confusion. I got on a working party. It was a weekend working party. I had to go both days. I remember getting off the U-boat. As soon as we all got off the boat, the Marines asked me, he says, "Is anybody here raised in the country?" Of course, I raised my hand. And there was about, maybe 5 or 6 of us raised our hand. And he goes, "You guys over here." And then he tells the other guys to go off over this other direction. And then he asks us, he says, "Well, has any of you had any experience with horses?" And I raised my hand and nobody else did. And he says, "I want you over here." So he pushed me over here to the side. And then he had these other guys go off and do whatever they were going to do. And then when he got to me, after he got everybody else going, he goes, "Well, your job is to take care of this Marine Colonel's horse." He says, "You need to make sure he has water and food and poop scoop." And that was my job for 2 days. I took care of that Marine Colonel's horse. It was rather kind of boring. I mean, it was just people moving all over the place. And while I was, the first day, while I was there, I had a Vietnamese man approach me and get a first grade reading level book with him.
Yeah.
And he showed me the book, and he said he had to learn how to speak English. So I was going through this book, and I was, just kind of teaching him how to sound out the word. And pretty soon the crowd got bigger and bigger. I probably had 30 people standing around me. And I'd pronounce the word, and they'd try it.
You became Sesame Street. Yeah.
So I became an English teacher.
Yeah, you're the founder of the ESL program, the English language thing that they teach to everybody that comes to the country.
Get me in trouble. But anyway, at the end of that day, he asked me, he says, "Are you going to come back tomorrow?" And I said, "Yes." Well, the next day I showed up at the same place. I did my job, and pretty soon he shows up. And he's got two bundles of Vietnamese money. and they were I don't know, call them $500, but it was a 500, and it was kind of a pink shaded color of money. But these were consecutively numbered and banded bundles of money. And he hands them towards me, and I said, well, I can't take your money. And he goes, he just kept trying to give it to me. I said, oh, I can't take that. I can't take that. And he goes, well, it doesn't make any difference. The country fell, so the money's no good. And he goes, and besides that, I got 2 suitcases full back at the camp. And I thought, why would you take that when you flee the country? I guess maybe in hopes that you'd go back. Well, I asked him what he did for a living. I guess he owned like a lumberyard. He just sold plywood.
Wow.
And that's what he did. He talked me into taking it, but I distributed it amongst some of my shipmates, and I kept a few bills myself just for, remembrance, and I've misplaced them. I don't know where it's at now, but that was quite a time during that evacuation, and all those people. It's just amazing that the number of people that were displaced during that situation.
How did you like Liberty in San Francisco?
Well, actually, I didn't really go into San Francisco that often because, the closest to San Francisco you'd tie up would be Alameda.
Yeah.
But I did take some liberty. I went with a friend of mine that was in Deck Force, when I was in Deck Force, actually, to San Francisco. We went to a concert there at Winterland. And the 3 bands that were playing at Winterland that night were Jefferson Starship, Blue Oyster Cult, and Kansas.
Oh,
and
wow.
Kansas is from right here in Topeka.
Wow.
That's where they started at, is right here in Topeka. Well, the age that I was before I went into boot camp, I didn't really get to see a lot of Kansas, so I didn't really know much, about them. But I knew they were from this area. But anyway, we went to Winterland, and we waited in that around the block 3 times line to get into Winterland. And once we got in, the concert started, and it was just an amazing concert. And that was my first experience with drugs. Actually, I probably was hiring a kite by the end of the first play, and I wasn't smoking anything. I was just breathing the air. But
that happened to me too.
Did it happen to you? No, I swear, I didn't smoke anything or anything. It was just breathing the air in the auditorium. I was I think probably
Contact
feeling
high.
Yeah. From that, because in between the changes of the bands, I kept thinking, boy, it'd be really good to. I'd love to see Robin Trower play. I'd really love to see Robin. I like Robin Trower, and that was in my rock era of time, and he was one of the bands that I really, really did enjoy his music. And I was just thinking while they were in between, and all the crowds talking to one another, and they're waiting for the stage to get reset for the next band, and they got this big screen in there, and they're playing different bands that have been in there, and I'm thinking all this time to myself, I'd sure like to catch Robin Trower. About the time the song was over with, or they were ready to start the other thing, I look up, and all the time this music's been playing was Robin Trower on the big screen, and I didn't realize it.
It's hilarious.
My mind is just, just overcome with the cloud in the building.
It's funny. Okay, I saw the Grateful Dead in Utah with Jerry Garcia. But that's not the funny part, because there was so much marijuana being blown around. I was like so stoned. I go, I got to leave here. I have a clearance. I got to go be a signalman. I don't have time for this shit. Let me out of here. And they had changed the door. They had chained the door shut. I almost had to get in a fight with one of the bouncers to get out of there. My buddy's like, this is great, man. I go, I'm going to go sit in the car. He was a civilian. He didn't care. But here's the funny part. You and I were both signalmen, okay? And we're quite a few years apart on the years that we were there, like a decade or more, right? And I went. So this was what year that you were seeing Kansas? Because I saw them in Italy in 1984, and a guy just posted a poster from it. They came to Italy on a USO tour where I was living on an army base in 1984. So not too far after you, I was listening to Carry On Wayward Son.
Well, it was in '73 when they played in Winterland.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Wow. So I was seeing them so much later, but we were both signalmen that listened to Kansas. How funny is that? I mean, if I was using my salesman tactics, that would be part of rapport. You know? That's hilarious. You know, the signalmen all had you were into lifting weights. You sent me those pictures. I was a monster weightlifter too. And it's funny, man. Like the signalman tradition carries on, and it's so great to catch up with you and your buddies who all stayed tight together just like me and my shipmates did. I mean, we're all the same ship. I can only wonder how many signalmen total were on that ship. I know that Chief Hill, the one that I showed you a picture of, went back like 3 or 4 times to the Mount Hood because he lived out in Vallejo and he wanted to be close to his house with his family, right?
Oh.
So he kept getting restationed on that ship. And, yeah, he did a lot of sea duty for sure. Was a signalman, you know.
Yeah, there's much else you can do with that. That trade, I did enjoy it, honestly. Once I made my way up there, I felt like I stumbled into probably some of the best duty that you could have gotten on board the kind of ship that we were on. I don't know what it would have been like on somebody else's ship, but
for the
Mount Hood, thought it was just exceptional duty, and liked it. I liked it.
We get to work out, smoke and coke. You know, look for bad guys. Look for the Russian AGI spy ships. Remember that with the big eyes? You know?
Oh, yeah.
Look at your memorize Jane's fighting ships. And, you know, challenge yourself to see what might be on the horizon if you could, you know, outdo the OSs down there in CIC and see if you can identify a ship well before them. You know, man versus technology, right? So,
yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the Navy today with the ships that are being ran into and that sort. It would never have happened in my time.
Mine either.
It just wouldn't have happened. You got a port and a starboard wing watch on the bridge where the helm's at. You got the signalman above you that are constantly looking, and you got a fantail watch. With all of those people have binoculars, and their job for each rotation. For me, it was whether I was on a 4-hour watch or whatever. I was up at the signal bridge for that whole watch, and that was my job to look all around the ship. If I missed something or they wanted me to look with the big eyes, so they'd get on the squawk box and say, look over here or whatever. Well, you get on the big eyes, and of course your horizon's 10 miles away. And, you know, you'd pick them up better with the big eyes than you would just a regular handheld binocular. But still, as such, you had your wing watches, port and starboard, and you had the fantail watch, and every one of those individuals stood at watch for 1 hour before they rotated to the next duty station. But during that 1 hour, those binoculars were scanning all the time.
You know, I did 2 podcasts on this topic. When that first happened, I blasted all over the Facebook to thousands of groups. I said, tell SecNav to call me. Because I know exactly what happened. Because I'm not going to go into it on this podcast. This is about you. But, you know, I've caught some bad guys. I've caught some things, mines, different things, right? Because we stood extreme. We were the masters of the watch visually, you know. Those deck guys were important with the binoculars, but they didn't have the horsepower of the big eyes that we had on the signal bridge. And we were always tuning in, you know. Our alertness was heightened. We were like the difference between an infantryman and a sniper. You know, you can catch different game with different weapons, and you can, you know, you're more alert on different professions too. So, yeah, I found out that signalmen were removed from the Navy in 2003. And, you know, they replaced a lot of that with cameras, like digital cameras, okay? So you're getting away from that human situational awareness, that high level of like a hunter's intuition. You know what I mean? And you've become lackadaisical behind a screen, and so you're sitting there getting lulled to sleep by the hypnotic fuzziness of the screen, right? You're not really out there as an integral part of the human radar. You know what I mean? And I think you've figured that out yourself. I mean, all signalmen. I talked to hundreds of them.
Did CIC when you would go below from the signal bridge to the bridge?
Yeah.
Where they were steering, and when you would go in from the starboard side of the ship, and you'd go in from the wing into the bridge.
Yeah.
Immediately on your left, was there still a lit up clear plastic kind of board with a say a bosun mate with a headset?
The Mo board. Mo board. Yeah.
The contact board.
Yeah, they called it the Mo board. Yeah, I think they had that on the bridge, actually.
Yeah.
And then there was CIC, and there was
right. CIC would call those contacts out to that person standing there with that headset and a grease pencil, and he would plot the course of every ship or every contact, and the officer of deck could look at that, turn around and look at that, and see who's out there. If he wasn't sure about something, then he would yell at. He would either walk out on the wing himself and look, or he would yell at us to try to identify, with the big eyes if it was a smaller contact. But I just don't see how they can have these issues of the deaths that are involved in it. It's sad. I just don't see how our Navy has evolved to this.
Well, we have dumbed things down with technology. I love technology, but I still think you need your human instinct, your human element. And, I sent you a video of me on the signal bridge just being funny. You could see how the bridge was built out, the signal bridge, me and SM2 Muter. And we were up by the Aleutian Islands on the way to Antarctica or something. But I remember that we had videotapes. You guys didn't have video, cameras back then. You guys probably had Super 8, if anything, or just videotapes were coming that way. They were too cost prohibitive for a young sailor to have one, and the prices went down over time. I've been filming since I was in junior high. I knew how to operate that stuff. Worked in TV and stuff too, but I don't know. Things changed through the Navy, so okay, now we get video cameras. Then the new Navy had cell phones on board. I'm like, they're looking down at their friggin' cell phones playing Angry Birds. And what that does is that screws up your 20/20, your night vision. It's kind of hypnotic like television can be, and it dulls your senses. When we were on watch, it was all about the 360, everything around us, right? I'm sure it was in your time too, right?
Well, we didn't have a whole lot there wasn't video at that time that was around. I mean, they had 35 millimeter cameras, but I was too poor to afford one.
Right.
Too dumb to save up and spend the money on one for sure, because I would have been able to document some incredible happenings during the Operation Frequent Wind time. But most all my pictures, you look through the lens of a 110 Instamatic camera, and it doesn't look bad there until you snap the shutter, and then whenever you do get the photo, you go, I didn't think that was a mile away.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, but that's the kind of pictures I ended up with, just a bunch of stuff like that. But the technology for better cameras with lenses were there. I just couldn't afford it and didn't really think I really needed it. But
we weren't thinking ahead. We were thinking, I'm going to go on Liberty, need a little bit of beer money, do my laundry, go out and have a nice meal, hang with the boys, have a good time.
Well, more just trying to save up money for what I knew was up and coming, and that was getting married and moving my bride to Concord, California.
Oh, yeah, the fine part of California. The desert of California, right?
Right.
Well, congratulations on being married that long. I mean, that's a beautiful thing to hear about. That's really nice, I'm all
Well,
pro.
Lynn, I'm a very fortunate man. I married my high school sweetheart. I can tell you this, it's the best thing that ever happened to me in my life, and I would hope that anyone else who's married in today's world is lucky enough to experience, a relationship like I've had. I don't know. I'm just a very fortunate man. I have a good wife.
Yeah, I have one too right now. I've had a couple bad ones though, because I was a bit of a stunt man, and I was good at getting married and divorced. And I joke with people. They go, "Why are you getting married again?" I go, "Because I'm good at it." No, but
Well, sometimes it just happens that way.
well, I don't think you had your high school sweetheart. You kind of had a Kansas culture in common. You kind of had the same vibe, the same expectations of life, sort of the frame. Whereas out here, and I'm being presumptive, but I'm probably sure a lot of that's true. But out here in California, geez, it's a more materialistic culture. It's a more stressful place to live. I just can't seem to leave this damn place. I love the ocean. I still live
It's a
here.
lot more liberal environment.
Yeah, well, they can do what they want with that. I'm me. I'm not joining any team or any gang. I don't like, damn those people. That's just like what it comes down to is the haves and have-nots, and everybody's trying to work their angle to get their inclusion to get a superior position in the world. So,
well, I think the coastal environments in our country are they run ahead of the things that trickle to the Midwest.
yeah,
When it comes to fads and that sort of thing, it doesn't quite reach us as fast as the coastal regions experience that stuff. And I'm not saying it's all bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying
I'm not going to defend it either because I'm just like I'm an open-minded guy. You know what I mean?
Sure. And I'm not saying anything bad about anybody's lifestyle or anything like that. It's their life to live.
Do what you want with it, right?
Right. And you live with the choices that you make. So that's that. It is what it is. So that's life.
Well, did you go right back to Kansas after the Navy?
I did, as a matter of fact. When the ship went into dry dock in Alameda, I knew. See, my discharge date was March, and the ship was supposed to be in there for months. And what does a signalman do when a ship is parked in a dry dock and you're not going anywhere doing anything? I asked my leading petty officer after finding out how long we were going to be there. They were supposed to fit the ship with ASROC missiles when I got off.
Never
Take
did.
Take the three. They never did do that, I don't think.
No.
But they were supposed to take the gun turrets, the 350s off, and then put ASROC on it, and they didn't do that. But anyway, amongst the other things that they were doing to it, whatever that was, I talked to my leading petty officer. I said, I'm going to get out in March. I'm not going to re-up. Would you sign a early out for me? And he goes, well, sure. He says, there's nothing we're going to do here. So
Yeah.
he told me the channels that I'd have to walk it through. He said, write up the request. And he says, I'll sign it. And then he says, then you got to take it to the division officer, the XO, so on and so forth. And gosh, after having that conversation with him, I filled out the early out request and he signed it, and he said, take it to those places. I did, and within 15 minutes, I was walking that early out to the ship's office to type up my discharge papers.
Yeah.
I was out that fast. I got out that fast. Well, it was only a handful of days later, the orders were typed up, and I was released, and I told my wife, I said, pack up everything we got, because we're headed home, and it wasn't, less than a week from the time I started that, I was standing in Kansas.
You're like, tap your heels together, honey. You're back in Kansas.
Yeah, that's right.
What did you get into after the military?
Well, I've been in multiple things. At first, when I got out, I wasn't real sure where I was going to find a job. Nothing really correlates to a signalman's job as far as sending Morse code light or
Roger that.
flags or whatever. Yeah, there's just nothing in civilian life. I ended up taking a job at the VA for a year.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something I really wanted to do, but I worked it for a year, and then I used the GI Bill. I went to school. I was trained in electricity, heating, and air conditioning, actually, and I worked in the refrigeration and home heating industry for a year, and then I jumped into plant maintenance.
Well,
I
cool.
worked for a short stretch at Hallmark, or at Frito-Lay, working on their equipment, packaging and production equipment to make your snacks that Frito-Lay makes. And that wasn't a real long stretch. I found out that Hallmark Cards was looking for maintenance people at the time, and I got off work one morning. I worked third shift, got off work, and I went over and I filled out an application at Hallmark Cards, and they walked me through the interview process, and they hired me that day. And
Nice.
I worked as a maintenance specialist for Hallmark Cards for a few years on their printing presses and stuff, and I got stuck on graveyard again. And the reality of working at Hallmark Cards is such a good place to work, and I love the job, but I would have been on nights my whole career because nobody ever leaves. It's just too good of a job.
I see.
It came up that there was kind of a slow spell at the time, and my brother-in-law in Missouri, in Branson, Missouri. I don't know if you hear about Branson out in your neck of the woods, but
It's like like Las Vegas without all the shenanigans, right? It's like it's all the shows, kind of but none of the gambling and the drinking and all that, right?
Well, Branson was a tourist attraction. People would go there. It was more country music based kind of thing at the time, and it was a seasonal, go while the kids are out of school, and there's homespun country music people down there, and then some of the bigger stars started going into Branson about the time that this happened. But like the show Hee Haw.
Yeah, I remember that. I used to have to edit it.
They had a theater there, and then some of the stars on Hee Haw would come and perform at that Hee Haw theater, and it kind of grew from that into other bigger names coming in too. But anyway, my brother-in-law was killed in an automobile accident, and he had a service station type of business. It was a gas station, liquor store kind of business, and things were slow, so they asked if anybody wanted to take any voluntary time off. They could. Well, this all took place at the same time after my brother-in-law had died from that accident, and I told my wife, I said, well, I can go down and help her, my sister-in-law, for a month or so if I need to. And I took off voluntary time off from Hallmark Cards, and I went down there, and I kind of was helping get the shift straightened out and just keep things running. And after about 2 weeks, my sister-in-law asked me if I would be interested in buying her out of that business. And I told her, well, I wasn't real sure. I'd have to talk to my wife, which is her sister, if she would be interested in moving from Kansas to Branson, Missouri. And we talked it over, and we just decided, well, I would at least have a family life. I had a wife with 2 young children at that time.
Yeah.
And working graveyard all the time just wasn't much of a life. And we just thought, well, this is a chance I can get to days and be with my family, but I have to move to Missouri from Kansas to do that. Well, that's what happened. I ended up taking over the business. I did kind of a major remodel on it, combined as a convenience store type of arrangement. The gas station became self-service with the liquor store and convenience store all combined into one building. I did that remodel to it, and then we ran the business for a few years, and I just got burnt out on it and sold it, and then I ended up moving back to Kansas and getting back into some of the maintenance stuff involved in hospital type stuff for a while, and then I started my own. I had a back injury, and then that kind of drove me into something. I thought, well, I could maybe drive a truck or something that's not physical or whatever. It doesn't take a lot, so I started a trucking company, and I've been doing that for the last several years. Of course, where I live in Kansas, I own some land too. I have about 230 acres of land here, and
wow,
I raised beef cattle for the steakhouses. So anyway, I kind of between those two things, that kind of kept me busy, and my wife continued to run the remaining part of our other stuff that we kept when we did sell the retail side of the gasoline business that we had in Branch, and she continued to run the wholesale side of what we had built over time, and then I kind of branched back into my country roots and started raising livestock and supporting them with what I needed to raise for crops to feed them through the winter, and then I operated the trucking business at the same time. So
that's pretty
that's
cool.
what's kept me busy the last several years.
I know a little bit about that. I mean, I dated a girl before I met my wife whose parents owned the Marlboro Man Ranch. So they have a cattle ranch that sells to the big beef distributors out here. Harris Ranch, which is really big in California.
Right.
I didn't get to do any of that stuff, but been on the ranch. I like hearing a successful entrepreneurial outcome of a signalman, because I guess that's a signalman's way. I got into business and business owning and all that stuff too, you know.
Right.
So it's pretty interesting. But now I'm pretty much just retired off the VA. So I don't work. I just do the podcast as my hobby. Seems to be growing a lot of traction, though. It's getting thousands of listeners, and they're all over the world. They're in Russia, China, everywhere.
It's a good thing that you're doing, because I don't think a lot of people have any idea what place in the 70s over there. I mean, really, when I was there, I wasn't even sure what all was going on.
Well, I think for me, it's to call you up, an old shipmate, a fellow signalman. We were both signalmen on the same ship. And there's only so many of us in the history of mankind, because the Mount Hood was decommissioned in '99, and then it got mothballed about 4 or 5 years ago. We saw it off out of the Vallejo, and me and several shipmates that were on there from the '87 to '91 era, right? And it was interesting. So I'm reaching out to all the old shipmates and sea ancestors and sea babies that came later, you know. And I did a podcast with a young guy. You can check out the podcast. I'm going to send them to you. There's like 25 of them. You'll find it. It's like a very interesting, like audio opera, you know, where you get to hear about all the pieces that connect on that ship. I mean, you have a very interesting story. And I don't know. The more I do it.
I actually called Brownsville, where the ship went.
Mm-hmm.
I called the salvage company that was to dismantle the ship, and I talked to one of the guys there, and I told him who I was and the purpose of the call. I was wondering if there was anybody there that could document the dismantling process.
Yeah.
So that we could see what was our what we were attached to, the Mount Hood, go from such a fine vessel to the keel where it began. And the guy just pretty much just told me that they dismantle so many ships, and there's just no way that they could do anything like that. And I said, well, look, if you guys just set up a camera and just turned it on and off, pointed at the ship once in a while, I said I'd be glad to pay for a video. That would be a time lapse of the ship over time being dismantled down to the keel. it just wasn't something they wanted to do, which I thought that was, they could make a lot of money on the side doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, here I am making the first podcast of the first ship in the United States Navy ever, which is our ship.
Well, he told me that I could go to the U.S. Navy memories thing. That really, I did do that. I followed the ship out of dry dock where they took it out of the mothball and drug it past where you said you were at, and put it in the dry dock to power wash the barnacles and everything else that collected on it off of it, so they could tow it down the coast and through the canal and back up the Gulf side into Brownsville so they could cut it apart. But I followed that through its process. It's kind of sad. I mean, you kind of hate to see it go. I would have loved to have climbed back on the ship, say from the mothball fleet time where we could have got on board and went up, because I'd always was interested in what they did to the signal bridge. It always looked like the pictures that I could see of the ship that they had done something different to the signal bridge, which you showed me those pictures. So
I sent you a video too. I don't know if you went to the link yet. It's in your phone.
I did. Yeah, it's. I think what you had mentioned in your email or your text was, I think, what used to be the old signal bridge, which was just right in front of the smokestack and the mast.
Yeah.
There was a small walkway there, about 4 foot wide, 4 to 6 foot in width.
Yeah.
And that would have been the back of the signal shack. And it wasn't. I mean, if you stood inside the door of the signal shack and you stretched your arms straight out, you might have had a couple feet from touching one wall to the other. So I'd say it's about 8 feet wide by 10, 12 feet long. That's all it was, a door in and out. And it had one little recording station in the forward starboard side of that shack, which, I mean, had windows, all the way around the front and the side there where the door was. But you had one little place there that you could set on like a bar stool, and a desktop there that you could. I wrote many letters on that, and the squawk box was just right up above it. But off to the side of it, it wasn't anything but just your. I think there might have been some heating device there for when it was cold. You turn some heat on in there, and then we had a little under-counter refrigerator. We used to buy pop from the canteen, and we'd take cases of pop up and stock up the refrigerator. And people, when we were underway or whatever, they'd come up there and buy a soda for 50 cents. And we bought it mostly for ourselves, but it kind of got out that we had it on hand, so a few people would come up on occasion and buy a soda. We just put the money in the kitty and replenish it.
Yeah.
But, on the back wall was nothing but just a book rack, and there was I think an infrared box that had a night vision scope in it, and we used that for a bench to sit on, and that was about all there was in there.
Yeah, it changed a lot. I think my goal would be, after I do about 100 podcasts, 100 different shipmates, is to do like a GoFundMe page to start a documentary. And I'd like to go out and film all people like you and everybody, just cruise around the whole country, meet everybody and film and, edit it and make a documentary about it. Because just to cap off the audio side of it all. Because I've got film skills, I've got cameras, I have all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
So it'd just be gas money. Just go around, meet everybody, make the documentary, and leave it there in the internet for the rest of mankind to see forever. Just like the podcast.
Have you ever been to any of the annual AE Sailors gathering?
We had a Mount Hood reunion last August. And
where was it at?
Actually, it was this year, August. It was in Oakland. 125 people showed up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a huge turnout. It was
Yeah,
mainly my
I'd
era.
like to.
Go ahead.
I've been a member of the AE Sailors Association for years. I haven't made any of the gatherings. I'd like to sometime, although I don't know that I know anybody there except for the two shipmates that I've really kept in touch with. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything. You can always have a good time meeting new people.
Well, that's the secondary part of the podcast. As soon everybody will know when they listen to all episodes, they'll know these people's story. And then we'll have a huge reunion, and I'm sure the turnout will be bigger in another year or two. That's kind of a goal because we have a big core group of people. I went with some guys from my era. We went down to Southern California, met up with people that were on after us, people that were on during the same time from like 86 through 92, and then people that were on 93 to 96. And there was about nine or 10 people that showed up. But the one, there's a group of us up here that meet up. There's about 8 of us that hang out all the time in the Bay Area that are still here. And I find it really refreshing. It's not, it's just that people that understand where you came from, kind of, you know what I mean? It's really nice. So yeah, that's why I started the podcast. I go, there's so many sea stories. I'm not going to wait for the History Channel to call us up, and they only make 1-hour documentaries. So there's no way they're going to get to 400 sailors, 350 sailors, and get all their stories. And especially, I would estimate, since 1971 to 1999, probably about 3,500 or 3,700 people lived aboard that ship on and off at different times, whether they were there for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or 5, depending.
Right.
And so the crew was always circling in and out. So I did some math. I figured there's 3,700 people. I'll get a good 100, but by talking to you and your buddies, Mr. Warwick, it's kind of like I get to get the earlier story of the Mount Hood, and I've even got the last year of the Mount Hood with a guy that was on in 98 to 99. And then he went from there to an AOE, but the Mount Hood had moved to Bremerton, Washington by then. So the kind of cool part about the podcast is you get to follow the story, different wars, different times, different ports, different cruises. The ship had an interesting life, and so did the people that were on it, I think...
Sometimes I kind of felt like the ship was unrecognized for a lot of what it did. I felt like we did an awful lot.
Yeah.
With very little recognition. But, it took 28 years for our government to decide that Frequent Wind was going to be the last campaign of the Vietnam War.
Oh, it's true.
I'm actually considered a blue water Navy, so they're saying I have no exposure to Agent Orange, although some records seem to indicate that the blue water has just as much, if not more, exposure as some of the inland waterways. But
yeah, it's a pretty interesting disqualifying tactic. I don't know. I've got my VA. The VA takes care of me, but I didn't claim it for 20 years.
Right. Well, my daughter is actually she is a nurse practitioner, a hospitalist for the Veterans Hospital here in Topeka, Kansas, the Colmary O'Neill Hospital.
Oh, cool.
She loves what she does. She loves working with the veterans.
Awesome.
She's told me that I need to do a comp and pin on my ears.
Yeah.
Because my time in the deck force, which was several months, the needle scaler that I described to you, there was no hearing protection. I mean, literally none. My ears would ring for hours.
There's a high chance that you have tinnitus. You do have tinnitus, actually. What you're telling me.
Oh, I do have tinnitus. I was diagnosed with that years ago, but
it came from the Navy. There's a lot of guys that claimed it. It's one of the easier comp and pen plans to go through, and it's legitimate. Right. It's not some fakey, sneaky thing. I think that.
Well, between that and then, did you ever get back in the aft steering room of the boat?
I never had to deal with that, no. I was always on the signal bridge.
Back by the fantail where the bosun locker was back there.
I've been back there,
yeah. That was the aft steering room.
Yeah.
And as a bosun mate of the watch, you would rotate from your wing watches across through the bridge, messenger of the watch, helmsman, over to that tracking board where you would take that little pencil and mark contacts, then back to the wing, and then down to the fantail into that aft engine room. From the aft engine room, you'd go to the fantail, but that aft engine room, you were just in this closed-in area where the ship's screw, the propeller shaft, was spinning in there, and all these high-pitched hydraulic motors for the rudder, steer that rudder.
Yeah.
You'd be in there for an hour with the headset on, which really doesn't keep any sound out. It was hard to hear anybody talking to you because all the noise that was still getting through to you. But between those two items, I kind of feel like I probably initiated the damage to my ears there. But
I would definitely go file for it. They're not very combative on that. Like I told you, I got out on a medical discharge. I didn't get into that part, but I had a big bad motorcycle wreck while I was in, and I'd been in a Desert Storm. I'd been around some very dangerous stuff. I had a paper trail of all my ailments, so nobody told me to go to the VA and go get my benefits and so forth, and they weren't calling me. Okay, so 20 years goes by, and I walk in, and they just go, here. And I'm like, yeah, shit, I just left $600,000 on the table. So just imagine that.
I actually walked into the VA a month ago.
Yeah.
And I thought, a lot of people are offering things to former vets. They're starting to act like Vietnam vets, what needed to be recognized more for what they contributed, I guess, to the country and did.
I agree.
The country. They didn't really think too much of us when we were during that time frame, but they've kind of come around here in the last several years. And I thought, I don't mind. I wear a hat now that says I'm a Vietnam vet. I didn't used to up
Right.
until just a couple of years ago. I never said anything to anybody about it. And the picture of my wall that has the flag, my uniform, all that stuff. But that's over 15 years old. That's been up for 15 years.
Yeah.
And I never really advertised it to anybody, and I never really told anybody I was a veteran of the Vietnam War or anything like that. I didn't wear the hat up until the last 2 years, and I thought, well, these people are really starting to offer things to veterans, and I want to be able to prove to them, because there is an element out here that wants to make themselves look as though they really contribute to the country and so on and so forth. And I'm referring to stolen valor.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that crap. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't understand why anybody would do that. But anyway, I thought, well, maybe having an ID would be kind of handy. So pictured ID. So I go in and I get my record straightened out with them, because all they had was my separation DD-214 when I first left the ship. Well, it didn't have anything on it as far as campaign ribbons and awards or anything like that. And because frequent wind wasn't really revisited until 28 years later. That's when they said it was part of the Vietnam War.
Right.
And that's the DD-215 will reflect all of that. But anyway, that's what I had to do. I had to get the help of my congresswoman to get that straightened out. But I had like 6 campaign ribbons: the Vietnam Service Medal, Humanitarian Service Award, Navy Battle E, Navy Sea Service, and what was the other? I don't remember what the other one was. But I had 6 campaign ribbons that I would wear it. And in the picture I sent you, it shows those ribbons on the 2 uniforms that I have tacked up on the wall there with the flag. But I thought I'd go into the VA and say, well, do you have a pictured ID? Something that the VA doesn't have anything like that. This is 30 days ago. Well, in 2015, Congress passed a ID law where they are going to do a picture ID. So that the communication between Congress and the VA is still kind of lacking.
You got to talk to the right person. I've got that one. I've got my other ID card too. But I would talk to your veteran service office and schedule yourself for a CMP based on all the needle guns and all that stuff. And get your tinnitus, because that's at least a 10%, plus it's medical for the rest of your life. It's good to have.
Well, I probably need to go in and do it. I just haven't taken the time to go in and get with the right people and explain to them the situation. And, I'm sure they'd probably take care of it.
Just go to your veteran service office for sure. I mean, I'm pretty much sure that's where that came from, and you're entitled to it. It's just when you get out of the Navy, they're like, go flip burgers. They're not really, you leave and you're done. You're not a member of the club anymore. And it took me 20 years to even think about the Navy. So, here I am all these years later doing a friggin' podcast being Captain Navy over here,
During the time that you're in there, at least in my time frame when I was there, it wasn't very popular. So, the vets were kind of looked down upon. It was not a popular war. I mean, it's not a choice. It was my choice to go because I volunteered. But there was a lot of people ahead of me that didn't volunteer. They were drafted. The draft had just been abolished just before I went in.
Right.
And a lot of those people didn't have a choice.
No.
It's you went to jail or you fled the country or whatever.
And to Canada, yeah.
And people look down on the veterans. And I was in that era when it was not popular, so they just didn't like us that much. So that's one of them things. Like you said, you pack your sea bag when you're done, and you walk out. When you get home, you throw it in the closet, and you just move on with life. And like I said, up until about 2 years ago, I really didn't even say anything or even give anybody any hint of any idea that I'm actually a Vietnam vet.
Well, and then like almost 40 years later, another signalman calls you up on the phone.
Right. Well, that's good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I enjoyed meeting new people. And
me too.
And just like you, I mean, perhaps you've enjoyed visiting with me about my life aboard the ship and my time, as I have enjoyed what pictures you've shared with me and your experiences. We had a very skeleton crew for signalman on there, and the highest ranking, as I mentioned, was only a second class.
We were top heavy when I came on. A lot of second classes, first classes, and chief. I was the only seaman that came on board. So I was the grunt, but things change in time.
I had completed everything that I needed to go up for the second class rank.
Yeah.
For the petty officer second class. It took a little while, but the one petty officer, I was kind of a little bit lacking in the light, the signal, the receiving.
The speed, transmission times, words per minute.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my second class, the leading petty officer, we got out there around another ship. There were other ships, and he'd call on me to come up there, even if I wasn't on duty. And he'd say, well, I got somebody that wants, that I want you to talk back and forth with, And I just get on the thing, and we just start BSing back and forth. Where are you from? What's your name? That kind of stuff. And, you get onto it after you do it. The more you do it, the more you get onto it.
Yeah, it's a second language. Signalman,
right.
Signalmanese.
Right, and I got to the point where I was becoming proficient enough that I was getting along much better. So he signed off on it, and I was all primed to take the second class exam. And the Navy changed the thing and said, well, you had to be in for 3 years before you could go up for an E5. And I was only enlisted for 3, so I didn't get to go.
They did that to me. It's called pass, not advance. Hang on just one sec. I'm going to stop the recording because the recorder's dying, but I'm not going to stop talking to you.